Hey everybody, today we are going to use some simple tools which you probably already have in your arsenal to remote control a console. In this case today we're going to be using a Windows version of Pathfinder, and we're going to be controlling a fader on our Element console. No fancy tools, probably stuff you already have, and there's just a few simple steps to make this happen. In Pathfinder we're going to be using two things. We're going to be creating a software panel here on our panels tab, and then we're going to be creating some stack events, which are an if-then-else statement to map those software buttons to functions on this console. So let's get started. So we'll go to our panels tab and we are going to add a panel. I'm going to give this panel a name of remote. You can call it anything you like. I'm going to call mine remote just for simplicity. And I'm going to put some buttons on this panel. Button number 1 and button number 2, and then I'll just select them both by holding down the Shift key. Align them to the left just so they look a little better, and then I'll shrink this window up just so that it's a small little window. You can do all kinds of fancy stuff. You can put pictures on the background. You can do whatever you want. We're just trying to keep it simple here today. So let's give our buttons some names. We know that this top button on the top is going to be our on button, but I'm going to call it channel 10 because that's the console channel that I'm controlling. Call it channel 10 on, and then we're going to give it a caption of on. And for our second button, we will call that channel 10 off, and we'll give it a button caption of off. What's the difference between the name and the caption, you might ask, sorry. The caption is the text that the user sees. The name of the button is the name that's referenced internally, and it's how we tie the software buttons to the hardware buttons. You'll see what happens with that in a moment. So the other thing we want to do is set the color of our buttons. You'll see our console has a red on button and a yellow off button. So let's go ahead and set those colors. Our off button is already yellow. It has a back color when it's in the on state. That's this back color on. It has a color of yellow, and that's already what we want. The on button, we're going to change that. They're going to default to yellow. We're going to change this one to being red when it's in the on state. So we'll drag it over there. And so now our buttons are red and yellow, and that's really the extent of the configuration we need to do with this panel. There's one other little piece of information that you'll need as we go forward, and that is down here on the rest of this list, and that's the hardware map internal system name. That is the system name of the button, and we're going to need that for our stack events. So while I'm here, I'm going to double click in there, and I'm going to copy this and just paste it to my clipboard, get it on my clipboard so that I can use it. Our panel's done. The little asterisk up here tells us that we have unsaved changes, so let's go ahead and save our panel. It's important to keep the name, the file name that you have here, the name of the panel. If we called the panel remote, we want the file name to be remote. That's how those two get matched together. Don't call it remote and then change it to something on the file name over here, or your panel won't run. So our panel's saved, and in fact I could close the panel designer at this point because we don't run the button from here. I'm going to leave it open and just minimize it. So we're going to come over to our stack events, which is where our if-then-else statements are contained. I'm going to add a stack group. Stack group is just a folder by which I can organize my events in. And I'm going to call this remote stuff. And we're going to add a few events. We're going to add a stack event that says what happens when somebody pushes the on button down. We're going to add a second one that says what happens when they push the off button down. And then we're going to add a third one which controls the status of our software buttons based on what we have over here on our console. In fact, when I turn it on and off, what's going to happen is that software button will then follow the console. That'll be important for understanding that you have the console in the correct state or not. So let's get started. We're going to add a stack event. Pathfinder uses what we call qualifiers, actions if met, and delayed actions if met, which is the equivalent in software programming of if, then, else. If this happens, then we do that. Otherwise, we do that. We call them qualifiers, actions, and actions if not met. So our first qualifier is going to be our user button. I have this user button qualifier here, and this is where my button name comes into effect. I'm going to paste that in here, and that's how we reference that button. It's the remote.ch10on button. And what I want to track here is the key state. In other words, the state of the button. Did the button get pushed down? That's our qualifier. If it did, then the action, if met, is going to be an Axia console change. You'll see a little further down the list, we have Axia console change. I'm going to pick my console from this drop-down list. In this case, it's this one at 192.168.2.60. I realize it's called Fusion, but it's because my Element console is on a power station that is running Fusion software. So that's why it's got the name that it does. Yours will vary. It'll match up with whatever your consoles have for names in your facility. In this case, I could do it by Livewire channel number. If I had a channel number of 1, 2, 3, 4, it would control that channel no matter where it was on the console. Today, we're just going to do it by fader number. I'm going to pick fader number 10. And when the user button gets pushed down, I want fader number 10 to achieve the on state, which is the on state on as opposed to on state off. So that's my qualifier for this. This is the on button. I'll give it a name. And I'm going to save this. And so now we'll create the off button. We could do something very similar by just copying this. You can either copy it or you can drag it. If I just click on that and drag it down, it'll make a duplicate of it. I can double click on it. We're going to change this to say off button. We'll take the 1 off because I don't need that. The user button is going to be very similar, except instead of being the on button, it's going to be the off button. And we're still going to track the down state of the key. Did the user press the off button down? And if we did, then we're going to set fader number 10 this time to the off state. So it's the on state that we're controlling, but we're setting the on state to off. A little confusing, but it'll make sense. Notice there's no off listed here in the actions. It's only the on state, and it's either on or off, and that on state controls both the on and the off button on our console. So that should be good. We turn the channel off, and now all I need to do is create some status. So the status is sort of the reverse of our buttons. I'll call this channel 10 status. And in this case, the qualifier isn't going to be the buttons at all. It's going to be the state of the fader on the console. So the qualifier becomes an Axia console change. Again, I'm going to pick my console from the list. I'm going to pick fader number 10. And I'm going to say, is that fader in the on state? And if it is, we're going to perform some actions. When that console channel is not in the on state, we're going to perform some other actions. Want to guess at what those are going to be? That is going to be to set the state of our buttons. So our actions, if met, we're actually going to have 2 of each. 1 qualifier, 2 actions, 1 for the on button, 1 for the off, and then 2 actions if not met, 1 for the on, 1 for the off. You'll see what I mean here in just a second. So our actions if met is going to be our user panel button. And again, I'm going to go back to this button name. Channel 10 on software button. When the console channel is on, we want the on software button to be in the on state. Just like I did with the stack event, I can drag this down and it'll duplicate it. In this case, we're going to change the button name to be our off button. And we're going to set the off button to off. So does that make sense? Just like we have on our console, right? When the console channel is in the off state, the off button is on, the on button is off. And the reverse is true when the console channel is on. So that's really all we're doing here is just setting both of those buttons at the same time. And then I can drag these down to the actions if not met. So I'll grab my on button, And I'm going to say when the console channel is not on, the on button gets turned to off. And then I'll do the same thing with my off button. When the console channel is not on, the off button gets turned on. And that should be all I need to do to make this panel work. So I'll save my work. Again, the star up in the title tells me that I have some unsaved changes. So I need to hit OK to make sure I save that. And now we need to run the panel. So we're going to do that inside Pathfinder PC. You can also use a little program called Pathfinder Mini to launch the panel by itself. Just for testing purposes, we're going to do it right here inside Pathfinder PC. So I'll go to my user panels. I'll pick my remote panel that I just created. And let's take a look at our console and see what happens. So now if I click that on button, it should turn the console channel on, and I should get a status light back on my software panel. I do. And we'll just drag this down here so you can see both of them. And then the same thing should happen for the off button. If I turn it off, it turns the console channel off, lights my light. And now what I'll get is I'll get the console channel now affecting the panel. So if somebody walks into the studio, turns the console channel on, my software button will follow it, and then I can turn it off. So both controls control that console. And that's it. That's a simple way to create a remote on and off button for your fader. We'll have other options for you here in other videos. As always, I hope you learned something, and I hope you can apply this to your situation. Thanks for watching.